Welcome to Inversion trademark, an often forgotten 2012 third-person cover shooter made by Saber Interactive. Saber Interactive is sometimes known for their long history of pseudo-budget games, but today they are best known for their work on Halo's Master Chief Collection, so I guess things have turned out alright for them. Regardless, Inversion itself is obviously a limited-budget hodgepodge of third-person shooters from around its time. Many of the influences are plain as day, though it does manage to have a decent spoonful of its own identity. It's a product of its time in two major ways. For the more overt way, it's a third-person cover shooter released close to the tail end of the Gears of War craze. For the less obvious way, it represents one of the dying gasps of the middle-market video game. There used to be a strong middle ground between small indie titles and big blockbusters. Games like Inversion are in-betweens of mass-advertised AAA releases and obvious bargain bin titles. Incidentally, Inversion probably did end up in some bargain bins. Regardless, games similar to Inversion simply don't get made today because they're often too costly and ambitious for small studios, but they're also too humble and risk-taking to be big releases. Middle market video games need to take risks to stand out in a highly competitive market, often stacked against them. To compound that, the cost and manpower required for game development has sharply shot up, making these games even fewer and farther between than ever before. I think it's a shame because a lot of interesting titles have come out of this market. Back to Inversion itself, it's a great example of this. It came out in a time where most less prolific titles were copying what was popular but adding a bit of their own flair. They imitated a familiar foundation but gave it a unique spin. Someone saw Gears of War and thought, what if gravity's a war? I can't hold it against someone for that. I like gravity manipulation as a gimmick anyways. Games like Inversion can age surprisingly well, so did Inversion age well? Is it truly a satisfying cover-based shooter inspired by the intellectual works of Isaac Newton? Well, it's time to find that out. Acquiring Inversion trademark is very easy. You can buy it off Steam for $10 to $1.50. Today it's effectively a bargain bin game, but I'd wait for a sale. It seems to mostly run fine out of the box on Windows 10. Supports widescreen and all the things you'd expect. Since it came out in 2012, I'd really hope it has widescreen support and that it runs natively on modern operating systems. Unfortunately, this game has some infamous crashing issues. It's a two-part fix. If you have an Nvidia card like me, you need to use a control panel to configure your game's 3D settings and turn on multi-threading. Sorry AMD users, I don't know what you should do there to be honest. After that, you need to go in game and set the textures to low. Both of these things combined, the game was no longer crashing on deaths and on level transitions. It did crash when I reloaded a checkpoint once, but I think that might have been a fluke. At least this is an easy fix, but it's too bad you can't fix a mouse acceleration. Typical console to PC port issue. Oh well. Finally, this game is marketed with its co-op, but, well, it used GameSpy. GameSpy is so far gone that its mom probably doesn't call it anymore. Even if you could play co-op, good luck finding anyone willing to play this with you. Though you can play single player, the game was obviously built around its co-op. It even has those obligatory co-op shooter features such as the one where both players need to interact with the same thing in order to proceed. Instead of a fellow meatbag, you'll have to settle for the co-op partner AI. The partner AI doesn't perform too badly, astoundingly. He plays fairly defensively, uses abilities in combat, draws enemy fire, and seems to have some extra health to balance out his occasional bad tactical choices. He rarely went down, though it was basically a guaranteed game over whenever he did. Oddly, you don't go down in single player, so running out of health is just an instant death for you. I guess he didn't trust the AI to revive you? No clue. Let's move on to the premise. Inversion's story is as simple as it gets. You're the lead star of this strange buddy cop drama, Davis, paired up with co-op partner Leo. Davis is the most generic protagonist I've seen in a long time. A finely distilled witch's brew of the blandest aspects of every protagonist from every piece of action media ever. There's basically nothing to his character and his lines are delivered in absurdly monotone ways. Naturally, he's a father, vaguely miffed about his daughter being stolen by the antagonist, the Lutadors. The Lutadors. I'll let that name sit with you for a moment. Anyways, the game is about John Blandman's quest to rescue his daughter from the invading space wrestler cavemen. The story in this game is obviously kind of an afterthought, and it's hard to take it seriously.
Wow. How did you do that? I just put it there.
The general direction of the cutscenes is pretty bad, and so is the writing and even the voice acting. It sometimes has a bit of so bad it's good value. Like, I burst out laughing when the protagonist just happened to randomly, and I do mean randomly, stumble upon his wife as she dies in dramatic fashion. It was also always a comedic sucker punch when he whipped out a photo of his daughter and asked, "Have you seen this girl?" completely out of the blue. They're so awkwardly paced frames stitched together, it's great. To give you one of the best examples of this, you only need to look to what is effectively the opening cutscene of the first proper level in the game. In it, there's the most nonsensical car crash I've ever seen, where a truck, for no reason, swerves sideways down a tunnel and somehow the protagonists end up on the other side of it. Turns out it was a ghost truck. Ooh. Late insert here, slowing this cutscene down, it's not as bad as I thought since that black car is our protagonist's car. Still, it happens so unexpectedly and quickly that it's ridiculously confusing. Remember, this is one of the very first things you see. There's about 60 seconds of gameplay before this, most of which being in a turret section. Yep, just like Ride to Hell, that masterpiece, this game opens up with a turret section. Even though it is visually impressive by turret section standards, it's an omen of things to come. Oh, and speaking of cutscenes, this is one of those games where every other encounter is spaced apart by a brief cutscene. If you're familiar with Max Payne 3, just imagine that, but far less ridiculously mind-blowingly extreme. Far less, that is. This is a pet peeve of mine, but it at least became less common as the game went on. Story and cutscenes aside, I want to talk about core gameplay. If you're familiar with my channel, you're probably familiar with this particular shtick. There are 4 horsemen of mid-aughts to early 10 shooters, regenerating health, iron sight, sprinting, and a 2-weapon limit. By technicality, it's a third-person shooter, Inversion can't really have proper iron sight, so let's just replace that horseman with cover-based shooting for now. That's our conquest, or pestilence, or whichever. In that case, Inversion has all 4 of these things. Execution is key, so does Inversion make these things work, or does it join the ranks of many other mediocre to bad shooters? I'll start by talking about the cover-based shooting. It's okay, completely functional. It's your standard cover-based shooting affair. You have most of the abilities you'd expect to have, such as mantling, sprinting from cover, leaping between walls, blind firing, etc. Attaching to walls can be a bit finicky on rare occasion, though it otherwise didn't give me grief. Some walls you simply can't attach to, though this never bit me in actual combat. Overall, if you've played any other cover-based shooter, you've borderline already experienced Inversion's cover system. Regenerating health is strongly tied to this cover-based shooting. Since it's a regenerating health shooter, you'll be spending a lot of time in cover waiting for it to recharge. Oddly, you still get hit, even if you're completely hidden behind cover. You get most of the feedback for taking damage, but you seemingly out-regenerate it. I honestly have no idea what the deal is here, and it confused me from the start to the end. It's what eloquent encyclopedia memorizers call poopy game design. Anyways, Inversion is extremely punishing, at least on hard mode. You not only don't have much health, but the game doesn't have a proper health gate. A health gate, for the unaware, describes a game mechanic where the player can survive extremely damaging blows that would have otherwise killed them, at the cost of being left at extremely low health. Inversion either doesn't have this, or it has a very punishing iteration of it. Combine that with your smaller than average health pool, and it means that there are tons of instant kills in this game. Notably, shotguns can one-shot you from mid-range. You can often do the same to enemies, so I guess they don't get too many special favors at least. I'll be honest, this game is surprisingly difficult, and it's easily one of the hardest games on my channel up to this point. Though in all fairness, I've never been most cut out for cover-based shooters. I instinctively always want to run and gun. Enemies are aggressive and can easily dump damage on you sometimes. Despite having a partner with you at all times, they're more often than not focus you down. Like I said, the AI partner doesn't do too bad of a job holding his own. His AI is at least equivalent to double-digit brain cells, as he actually provides support, uses abilities, and plays relatively defensively. Still, Inversion ends up being surprisingly difficult because of how ferociously punishing and arbitrarily difficult it sometimes decided to be, especially with bosses, as I'll describe later. I played very few other shooters that feel like they have as many instant deaths and what was I supposed to do there moments as Inversion. Thankfully, this game tends to be generous with checkpoints, but dying to a boss is, horrifically, a reset. As for the other 2 horsemen, sprinting is ridiculously standard, not really worth talking about in detail. It's a movement speed boost supplemented with shaky vomit vision that prevents you from firing your guns. Same mostly goes for the 2-weapon limit. Inversion is one of those games where it may as well be a 1-weapon limit since you always want an assault rifle in one slot anyways. Anyone who's played shooters in general should be familiar with these 2 features, and there's nothing particularly special about Inversion's implementation of them. I do have a bit more to say about the 2-weapon limit though, which I'll mention as I'm talking about the arsenal proper. All of these things combined, Inversion mostly plays like your typical third-person shooter of the era. You don't get to play too aggressively in this one, though you can certainly pump out a lot of damage each time you pop out your head. Since it's cover-based shooting, the expectation is that you're patient and accurate rather than fast and aggressive. Inversion does a better job forcing out of cover than most other cover shooters. It features things such as melee enemies and bosses that force you to stay moving, grenades that are deadly but telegraphed, and destructible cover here and there. Still, I'd say more than half this game is the typical shooting gallery affair you'd expect of a cover-based shooter. There is an additional problem with the core gameplay, and it's the mouse acceleration. I probably look like a much worse shot than usual in this video. Well, I do have off days sometimes, and my specialty is generally making bad guys go boom. I used to play lots of Demo Man, I'm currently playing Moe's in Borderlands 3, I had a wet dream about Strife's grenade launcher, etc., but the mouse acceleration is particularly bad here and can't be turned off. Inversion is a console to PC port, and this tends to be a common issue with those. The sensitivity accelerates like a jet engine snail, so it's often hard to make minor corrections you need to land headshots. Thankfully, I discovered that headshots aren't too big of a deal in this game. You can get by with body shots fairly alright. Enemies tend to die quickly anyways, and the hardest enemies end up being the ones you can't headshot at all. Now it's time to talk about the gravity gimmicks, all of them. About an hour-ish into the game, you get a gravity pack, which totally doesn't look vaguely like the rig from Dead Space. The markers manipulate your lying eyeballs. This gravity school bag is a primary thing that sets this game apart from its competitors. You slowly acquire new abilities for this thing as you progress. It has a limited amount of charge, but the charge pickups are fairly generously sprinkled about the levels, so you have tons of opportunities to play around with it. Like onions, there are a couple layers to it, low gravity mode and high gravity mode. You can switch between these two modes on the fly, with each one having a slightly different set of abilities associated with it. The low gravity mode is probably what you'll use the most. It allows you to fire out a bolt that suspends enemies in the air, like a Dollar General phase lock from Borderlands. Area isn't too great, but it serves its purpose. It's primarily good for making enemies vulnerable or chaining it together as telekinesis. Speaking of telekinesis, I'm usually a sucker for telekinesis type abilities in games, but most people seem to disagree with me on that one. The telekinesis in Inversion is a mixed bag for me. It's rather unwieldy and surprisingly likely to get you killed. It's nice that thrown objects are instant kills and that you can grab low gravity suspended enemies to throw them or perform an execution move on them, even from cover. Unfortunately, hitboxes in this game are weird, so it's easy to accidentally blow yourself up with thrown objects. Enemies can also still attack you while you have them grabbed, which is rather obnoxious and got me killed a couple times. I also don't care for the fact that you need to suspend something in there with a low gravity bolt in the first place to telekinesis it, even ammo and environmental objects. It forces you to chain powers together most of the time, which is a subtle psychological way to push me towards just using my guns instead of my powers. Shooting a gun is effectively a one-step process after all. The high gravity powers are useful as well, though I'm not sure if they're more or less useful. The high gravity bolt forces enemies, including bosses, to the ground. It's great for some enemies, and it can be a great method for stunlocking certain bosses when it actually decides to work on them. If you're up to it, briefly pause this video to flip a coin for me. If it landed on tails, congratulations, your high gravity bolt worked on the boss this time. It's finicky and it never feels like it works when you really want it to. The high gravity bolts are also frequently used for environmental puzzles, which just means you need to use them to create cover during scripted segments where you have to evade turrets. Instead of telekinesis, you can also create a damage absorbing shield, but it consumes so much power that it's often not very useful. The low gravity and high gravity powers mostly make sense, though I don't get the logic behind the shield. They can be useful and they do spice up the gameplay a little. Even mediocre telekinesis has the potential to be fun sometimes, and I guess there's something to be said about unwieldy powers such as these. You're pushed to use and manage them throughout various points in the game, especially boss fights. As a result, you need to get used to their jankiness and unreliability, which is the major problem I have with these powers in the first place. It's certainly not a bad set of powers, definitely can be fun at times, but it's rough around the edges without question. It makes the shooting more engaging, and it can speed up fights that would be slower and more painful in any other cover shooter. That comes with the caveat of them being clunky, awkward, and outright broken at times. Also, if you're pinned to the ground or floating, you can't use the opposite power to return yourself to regular ground. That's pretty lame. You'd think they'd have thought that through. That's not all of the gravity-related gimmicks, though. This game occasionally has these short gimmick set pieces where you're hopping from cover to cover in low gravity. Basically, you're flying, but at the speed of the world's fastest snail. These segments are a weird perfect storm of being gimmicky, dumb, and also very charming. There's something about them that's oddly funny, yet they sometimes still manage to make me feel like a badass anyways. Slowly flying backwards and one-shotting dudes far away? I can respect that. It's a nice bit of variety and an interesting concept. It's just a shame that these segments are extremely clunky, the execution is bit off, and they're generally very easy. There's effectively an entire second control scheme for these segments, but most of the unique moves you can pull off here don't have many practical uses. All you need to know is that spacebar replaces WASD. Despite most of these encounters borderline being shooting galleries, the clunky, slow movement between cover can easily get you killed in bigger fights. If you mistime your jump between cover, you're as much as efficient a barrel as the enemies. And on rare occasion, enemies may also come from out of your periphery and one-shot melee you, which is rather cheap. And for some reason, a lot of these segments don't have enemies to fight, or they only have a small skirmish in them. There isn't any actual real level design to these segments in general, and they just feel like they randomly peppered in a bunch of cover around in the air most of the time. It works, I guess, but these segments ultimately end up blending together as a result. They're novelty above all else. But admittedly, I find them to be a pretty cool novelty. And lastly, there's these sections where you jump onto walls or ceilings, often having to fight enemies who are sideways or upside down relative to you. It's a bit like the original Prey, if you're familiar with that. These are scripted and mostly only appear in the early game. In fact, this is one of the first things you see. More than anything else, these are also a novelty. Again, I can't help but at least appreciate them for this novelty value alone. It's something different. But again, it's too bad it never gets used in any overly compelling or interesting ways, save for a section where you need to fight some snipers above you. I feel like this is an amazing idea for a gimmick, especially if you need to use your gravity powers in conjunction with it, but that never happens. Imagine brain teaser battles where you need to mentally orient yourself to know what your gravity powers would do, or how you would get back to a good old-fashioned regular ground. Missing potential like this always makes me sad. Inversion is a game that opts for a very tried and true arsenal in an era where that's what most shooters did anyways. There's nothing overly funky or unfamiliar here, so it's a standard roster of assault rifles, shotguns, snipers, a minigun, etc. Instead of being particularly innovative, Inversion goes the extra mile by having them all be surprisingly potent and reliable. Unlike many other shooters of this era, you can actually hipfire and blindfire with a degree of accuracy. It's also a game where a mid-range shotgun blast can be an instant kill on both you and enemies. This is what people mean when they talk about equality. In fact, the shotgun is the first weapon you get to use in the game. Superb range and stopping power for a shotgun from this era. It ends up being a good boss slayer too. Honestly, the standard shotgun being this good took me by total surprise, and its only failing is just that a lot of arenas in this game are a bit larger than its effective range. Oh, and you don't have much health, so being aggressive is rough. There's a double barrel shotgun and plasma shotgun as well, though they don't seem quite as good. Double barrel only shows up in the early game, though it still stomps what you pointed at. Plasma shotty borrows from a shared ammo pool, better used for the plasma rifle, so I admittedly didn't really use it.
I can take it.
Then you have your fairly standard rifles, such as the Plasma Rifle, the Not Hammer Buster, and the Not Retro Lancer. Seriously, some of these designs are ridiculously similar. Maybe it's better than straight up including a gun with an underbarrel chainsaw though. It's not a Lancer, it's a Rancher. Regardless, they are good all-rounders. In general, most weapons in this game have a decent amount of range, accuracy, and stopping power, and these are no exception. Too bad the Not Retro Lancer doesn't have a bayonet shards though. Or a name. Could have missed them somewhere, but I have no idea what the names of any of these guns are, so I just have to nickname them. A standout inclusion, for the time, is a minigun. You can carry it in one of your inventory slots, surprisingly. Ammo is limited, but when you do get to use it, it tears through hordes mercilessly. Nothing you pointed at can withstand it, and even bosses become annihilated, changing their literally whole body into a permanent living Swiss cheese version. It may genuinely be among my top 10 shooter miniguns ever. Shame you only get it a handful of times, mostly in the mid-game though. That's kinda sad. Similarly, there's a flamethrower exclusive to the final hour of the game. For an astounding 5th time on my channel, it's a great flamethrower. Slightly weird particle effects though, so its range is hard to judge. Still, it's the most ammo efficient thing in the game by far, since one puff instantly kills a majority of enemies. Weaker against bosses, but oh well. Inversion also has a weapon type invented by All Gillied Up, sniper rifles. I didn't use this one too much because of the mouse acceleration making it almost impossible to get headshots. Thankfully, there's an extremely rare second variant that one-shots almost everything but bosses no matter what. Feels chunky, so it's pretty fun to use actually. Beyond that, there's 2 flavors of rocket launcher which do that thing I kinda hate where you can't pick up more ammo when you drop them when you run dry. Not much to say there. Grenades are great too. They've got good explosion radius and damage, and they're incredibly reliable. They explode on contact with enemies, which actually adds a nice sprinkle of finesse to using them. Throwing them is incredibly dangerous because of how much it exposes you, so it's a satisfactory bit of risk versus reward. They're also fair to fight against because they have a long fuse and plain as day telegraphing. Nicely designed, but yeah, that grenade indicator. That's a good pick for another circa 2010 generic shooter horseman. So the arsenal is at least fairly satisfying and well-rounded. It has all the guns you'd expect, and weapons are typically distributed in appropriate locations throughout the levels. None of these weapons are particularly bad, aside from maybe the impractical rocket launchers. Probably the regular sniper rifle too. I think the arsenal is intended to be linearly progressing, so early game weapons like the bootleg Lancer stop appearing at about the halfway point. It's weird since the enemies themselves don't really scale to the later weapons, so the average fight actually felt a little easier later on. In addition to that, the 2-weapon limit is still rather questionable. Inversion Inversion is relatively conservative with its arsenal design in comparison to a lot of its contemporaries. Despite that, it still features weapons rendered obsolete by their later counterparts anyways. There's no point to using them again if the game even lets you use them at that point. Why use a retro lancer when the plasma rifle is better with far more abundant ammo? You basically have a slot for the current rifle the game wants you to use, and one for whatever power weapon you want to hoard. Ultimately, I think a 3-weapon limit would have been far better here. Inversion is a game released in that era where shooters really wanted to have a lot of variety, which ultimately tends to mean you're regularly forced into a turret section or a physics puzzle or something dumb like that. Is that the case here? Well, partially. This game is incredibly light on puzzles, so if you brute force everything like me, you're good. No horrible environmental puzzles here, HEPs as I call them, and a few puzzles that are present here highlight what you're supposed to interact with in flickering neon Vegas sign, please are you blind, you absolute maroon, red or blue. Inversion is also merciful by having only a couple brief turret sections throughout the game. Turns out the game starting with a turret section wasn't as bad of an omen as it could have been. Still too many of them. The walking on walls and low gravity sections I mentioned before are fairly prevalent throughout the game as well. They aren't too much of a fundamental alteration of the gameplay, more like little sprinkles of spice. You can huddle behind cover in the low gravity flight segments and be pretty fine. Inversion does sort of forget about these gimmicks for a while in the mid to late game, but the last couple levels feel like a bit of a highlight reel of everything from the rest of the game. I like that kind of design. Also, there's these rare tight roping segments that are half broken. Probably a PC port issue, I don't know. Despite that variety, there's paradoxically still a lot of repetition. There's effectively only 3 enemy types to fight throughout most of the game. Regular soldiers, who get a bit more armor as you get further into the game, melee guys, and troopers with the gravity pack. The guys with the gravity pack are hilariously unthreatening, mostly because their telegraph is long and obvious, and they go down quick. Most enemy variety ultimately comes from the weapon they use, particularly the shotguns as super death they sometimes decide to one-shot you with. You do get 2 flavors of melee guys here and there who can be instantly killed by either high gravity or low gravity, depending on which type they are. Kinda weird, but I'll take it. It's something to encourage use of your powers. Beyond that, most arenas aren't too noteworthy. There were very few encounters that truly lean towards a poorly designed side, but your average gimmick-free fight isn't particularly stand out either. There's at least subtle attempts to make the average fight noteworthy, such as RPGs scattered about, hordes of melee enemies, giant drills from Rogue Trooper, etc. There's definitely more effort than average to keep things fresh and, aside from enemy types, Inversion never sticks to any one thing for too long. No gimmick or mix-up outstayed its welcome. Well, admittedly, that's a tiny bit of a lie. I hate these sections where you have to dash between cover to get past a turret. They show up way too often and consistently devolve into waiting for your health to regenerate. As long as you know where to go and how much damage you can sustain, they're almost impossible to fail. Were they proud of these segments? The thing is, as a cover-based shooter, encounters generally need to be designed so that both you and enemies can take cover. This means that a lot of arenas can be reductively reduced down to the side I hide behind cover on, and the side enemies hide behind cover on. There's almost always a no man's land of sorts in the middle of the arena. A lot of games' encounters adhere to this sort of design, and it's rare for them to offer things such as circular navigability, let alone flanking routes. Because you don't have much health and the arenas are designed like this, you'll be spending a lot of time pinned to cover, popping up to shoot enemies at opportune times, and waiting for your health to regenerate. There's a general lack of wiggle room in fights, and you really can't approach them your own way. This half-mindless shooting gallery combat is a major issue people have with cover shooters in the first place, and it's nigh impossible to escape this problem shy of meticulous or absurdist design. Inversion is experimental, but on a fundamental level, most of the arenas aren't all that interesting. You could do much better, but I guess you could also do much worse. There are bosses, as I've mentioned several times. They're pretty typical shooter bosses, usually tanky dudes with a couple different attacks. They're often interesting mix-ups from the cover-based shooting as they force you to be more mobile and aggressive. They throw some interesting things at you from time to time, such as grenade vomit or baby drones that double as explosive barrels. However, bosses are also where the majority of the difficulty comes from. Most boss attacks are basically instant kills if they hit you. Couple that with weak telegraphing and other tiny doses of unfairness, and you have some nasty boss fights on your hands. Many bosses have way too much health. The non-indentured servant chauffeur boss in particular feels like a damage sink on top of his overly long invulnerability phases. By overly long, I mean longer than like 5 seconds. You also repeatedly fight a lot of the bosses, usually with very slight changes to the arena or weapon available. A couple of them gain new ways to cheap you out in their later incarnations. The chauffeur shows up 4 separate times throughout the game. Bear in mind you first fight him at about the halfway point. In his final appearance, he suddenly decides to outrun you and aggressively melee slam you, where where he's seemingly immune to all forms of stunning. Brilliant design, I'm so glad to die to him like 5 times. He's the most unfair boss in the game, to be fair. The sponginess and occasional unreasonable attacks are only compounded by enemy reinforcements, simultaneously open yet claustrophobic arena design, and important resources being placed in out-of-the-way locations. The problems with the gravity backpack are also most prominent in boss fights. The boss fights are usually designed in such a way to strongly encourage uses of your gravity powers, which is actually very good design. The problem is that the powers can be clunky and unreliable in the first place, and these bosses can either accentuate those issues or simply make them more obvious due to the need to use and manage them more. Alright, so I may have been taking crazy pills? See, I was originally going to complain about the powers frequently not working, but reviewing all my footage, I barely saw the things I was going to complain about. Now I'm not sure if it never happened or if it just coincidentally timed with when I wasn't recording. Regardless, your powers work a decent chunk of the time, but it's always going to stand out when their tiny unintuitive design quirks get in the way. The bolts have a much smaller area of effect than you'd think, for instance. I think that's one of the primary things that throws me off about them. So I should point you back to a fairly consistent problem child here, telekinesis. It's quirky, like a self-proclaimed sapiosexual Twitter astrologist, but almost every boss in the game pushes you to use it. It's hard to tell from my footage alone, but the hitboxes for grabbing something is either pixel perfect or the size of a mammoth's blowhole. Bosses force you to swiftly grab and throw objects under pressure, a Swiss cheesification if you aren't quick about it. And you often need to cast your low gravity power first, making it a 2-step process to use telekinesis half the time. Compound that with grabbed enemies shooting back at you and your own thrown projectiles randomly detonating on top of you, and you have an ability that you might not want to use since it can so easily put you in a bad situation. Since bosses push you into using your abilities, especially telekinesis, so much, these oddities are going to shine through blatantly in these boss fights. Ultimately, bosses can be enjoyable mix-ups and some of them are fun, but they also emphasize Inversion's jankiness. For that reason, I really didn't like half of the boss fights. Doesn't help that the game features a couple short boss rush-esque sections here and there. I also hated the chauffeur boss because I hate any boss that has prolonged invincibility. So, how to summarize the general encounter design? It's not bad. There is some inventivity and fun stuff to see here. Thing is, I wouldn't say it's good. Bosses can be rather artificially difficult and tedious to fight at times, and the average skirmish isn't too varied up at a fundamental level. It's a cover-based shooter, so there's a lot of cover-based shooting where you shoot at enemies behind cover. Who'd have guessed? Even the flight sections can't really escape that. I respect the novelty and some of the creativity on display, so I judge Inversion's general encounter design as mediocre. I've merged both the visuals and audio sections since there's not too much to say this time around. I'll start with the visuals. Inversion definitely shows signs of its age, but it didn't hold up too badly. I think it looks a bit above average for its time, and it particularly excels with particle effects. It's nothing revolutionary, but I appreciate details such as bullet tracers, robots spewing out sparks, the meltiness of plasma bullets, bullets kicking up dust and plaster, etc. Firefights can feel pretty good because there's a lot of visual feedback all around. There's also the gibs, though they're not too noteworthy in the grand scheme of depictions of mortal vessel annihilation to appease Moloch. Mostly some satisfying headshots and enemies turn into an airy yet chunky salsa when they blow up. There's a nice little meat pop sound when you score a headshot kill, which is one of my primary incentives to go for headshots, beyond, the damage multiplier. Unfortunately, this game otherwise takes after the brown and gray titles of its time. To Inversion's credit, I would say its palette is more subdued than it is purely brown and gray. It's nowhere near as bad in this regard as most of its peers. There is some color in the blues and oranges visible in the latter half of the game, but the first half overwhelmingly takes place in environments where the domineering colors are gray and brown. At least there's no color filter, unless you're low on health. Beyond that, the general aesthetic is fairly interesting. I am a bit of a sucker for scrappy, apocalyptic worlds like this one, as I talked about back in my Rage video. There's a junk punk aesthetic to the Lutadors, which makes them distinct from your typical generic military-ish bad guys. As you progress, you find more and more sci-fi elements, but the Lutador homeworld at the end shifts to a grimy, junky aesthetic. I like the contrast going on here. Plus, there's a cool giant laser close to the end of the game. Giant lasers always make your game go up a whole letter grade. And an advertised feature of this game, which I barely acknowledge up to this point, is the environmental destruction. While it is very good, it is scripted in most cases. Don't go in here expecting Red Faction Guerrilla, it's nowhere near that level of interactivity. Sometimes you fight enemies who can wreck the environment, and that's always good looking. The opening turret section does show off some genuinely impressive environmental destruction, but it's one of very few times you get to desecrate the environment so much. Ramirez, shoot the pillars to show off the environmental destruction the developers put so much work into. Oh well. Oh, and a little side thing that bothered me is the weird scale. This is a world that was formerly inhabited by Amazons, I suppose, because a lot of things feel ever so slightly too big. This is especially present in the early game and became less common later on. How strange? This game actually does have a genuinely good sense of scale otherwise. Some environments look massive and there's clearly a lot of work put into the skyboxes from time to time. It really adds to the segments where you're upside down or attached to walls when you can see the skyscrapers in the distance. Fairly cool stuff. It's just a shame that they messed up some of the things that are more plainly visible during gameplay. As for sound design, it's overall rather unremarkable and below average in some ways. Most of the sounds are fitting, enemies generally have good callouts, ambience is alright, etc. Nothing was ever particularly awful or annoying, so that's about all the things I can say about passable sound design. There are a small handful of issues I have though. For the first issue, the gun sounds are rather inconsistent. Some of them are fairly decent and punchy, whereas others can sound like particularly high caliber Nerf guns. I think they could all use a bit more bass on average, but there's thankfully more decent sounding guns than bad sounding guns here. The music is something I take more unanimous issue with. It's generic, extremely forgettable, and rather soulless. Nothing grating, I'm just not ever gonna remember any of the music in this game. This also ties into the last issue, and it's a subpar audio mixing. I mean, given the audio mixing in this video, maybe I'm not the one to judge audio mixing, but I'm also not the one doing this professionally. Seriously, have you heard the birds in the background of some of my audio in this video? Regardless, ambience and music often feel overly loud relative to the dialogue, especially in cutscenes. In some cutscenes, it's weirdly hard to tell what people are saying. I did turn on subtitles, but they made the odd design choice to censor most enemy dialogue subtitles, so it's unnecessarily hard to make out what they're saying. Speaking of, voice acting could use some work too, especially from our protagonist, John Monotone, bizarrely. On top of all that, some things randomly feel unusually loud. It's weird when touching a box is much louder than firing a double-barrel shotgun. Just have a quick listen to the weird mixing and the highlight reel of a singular random skirmish. Beyond that, I guess it's mediocre. Like I said, there's nothing particularly offensive here, mostly minor to moderate hitches and oddities with the sound design. The problems can be rather pervasive, but not anything game-ruining. Nothing more to say, so I'm just jumping straight to the spoilers section. I'm not even gonna bother with a spoiler warning this time. You really shouldn't care about the story. Like I said earlier, it's basically a bizarre buddy cop drama where Earth, in quotes, is taken over by a bunch of weird caveman people who happen to speak pidgin English. That part is never explained, and the game gives you weird subtitles for them as a result. Anyways, what is explained is the fact that this game doesn't take place on Earth, which I didn't realize until it was explicitly pointed out. It's thanks to a left field plot twist. It turns out humanity has been living in a dome this whole time. Davis, our protagonist, is hilariously able to point out the specific rice field he lives in from space, while Everything You Know Is Wrong by Weird Al Yankovic plays in the background. This cutscene is really funny. There's basically no build up or payoff to this twist, it just happens. And a logical thing to do from there? Go to the Luchador Dome and have a tea party with their never before mentioned leader, Kilthur, who looks like a Mortal Kombat reject. Beat him up and some reactor goes critical or something, and he tackles our protagonist Davis off the ledge into the giant nuclear reactor death pit. He can't possibly climb back out in the post-credits scene. There's no way— oh wait, he does. Anyways, killing Kilthur was apparently enough to make the Luchadors surrender, but everything sucks now, so it all rounds out. Then it's revealed that Davis' daughter was dead all along, which was kind of predictable, and that's it, roll credits. Overall, the story's obviously kind of generic and slapdash. It's just a flimsy excuse to get from point A to point B. I guess it's not outright bad. It doesn't make me cringe or anything like that. It gave me more amusement than a lot of games that actually try to tell a story. It's just probably not for the reasons the writers intended. Is that a compliment? Let's say it is. Inversion's story is great, for a laugh. Also, shout out to Kilter for the title drop. The game never elaborates on what inversion is, hilariously. The thing in the title isn't explained. That's a new one for me. Though I guess most games have pretty meaningless or irrelevant titles. The thing is, inversion is apparently an actual thing in this game's universe, so it'd be like if Halo didn't even feature any space hula hoops and only offhandedly mentioned them. Or if Marathon 2 didn't even feature a marathon and only offhandedly mentioned— oh wait, never mind. Usually title relevancy only strikes into sequels. Inversion is the inverse of the rule because it's hip and cool. Ultimately, I guess Inversion is a fairly mediocre game. I liked it more than I disliked it, but it's nothing spectacular. It's an interesting title, at least for the novelty factor of the gravity gimmicks, and it feels like a time capsule of an era of gaming that probably won't be coming back. I do have a bit of a soft spot for these shooters that copied the popular thing but added wacky new mechanics. Like you asked a kid what the last game they played was and what the last thing they read about in science class was, and combined the two things into a new game. Kind of adorable, actually. So I'd say Inversion is worth a shot if it's on sale. Obviously, if you don't like cover shooters, you'd bounce right off of it. If you're more indifferent to them, like I am, it's a sporadically fun 6-ish hour romp. Has its highs, has its lows. No high point is ever particularly high, but no low point is ever particularly low. Gimmicks are at least novel and give it some modest charm and memorability. I don't regret playing Inversion, which is one of the highest compliments I've ever given to such a textbook mediocre game like this. You look up mediocre in a dictionary and they wouldn't have a picture of Inversion since dictionaries typically don't have pictures, and they wouldn't mention Inversion since that's not how dictionaries work, at least the ones that don't get sued or something like that. But you can't just grab a pencil and write Inversion to the definition of mediocre. That's good enough. That's all for this episode. Yeah, I never upload on time, but I'm hoping for the maximum delay between videos to be 3 weeks, maybe 4 if I have a big project. I already know the next few games I want to cover, with the next game being eerily similar to this one, just it trades a cover-based shooting for profound amounts of meat. Oh, and you get to be the one with a giant laser. See you then.
Me commands Inversion now!